All right, everyone, we're recording now. Hi, my name is Jessica Engelking. I'm with Great Plains Action Society, and I'm really excited to engage with you in this project. I know that there are a lot of BIPOC folks who are interested in going to law school, so I'm working to put together some resources, primarily in the way of teaching logic, that can help succeed on the LSAT. There's 5 of us. We could do an, okay, we're not going to do introductions. Let's just get started. All right, logic for the LSAT, brief tutorial. Okay. So this is day 1. I'd like to start out by introducing myself and what kind of the intention is with this product. So explaining the goals of this specific tutorial. Tomorrow we're going to be doing the bulk of the work going over actual LSAT questions and showing how we can use logic to best address those. And then, yeah, so we'll do a practice one of those at the end here. All right, so like I said, my name is Jessica Engelking, Great Plains Action Society. I do have experience teaching logic and reasoning courses at the college level. So I do have some authority on this issue. And so I've tried to develop a resource to help BIPOC folk use the skills one would get in a logic course to succeed on the LSAT. It's not going to be a comprehensive logic course. I mean, that would be great and helpful and everything, but instead I'm going to try to focus and narrow the scope to those skill sets and information needed for the LSAT specifically. And this is only going to be addressing the logical reasoning portion of the LSAT. The reading comprehension, I mean, I could help with, but it's really outside the scope of my expertise, so I won't do that. Also, the logic games section will be dropped within the next year or so, I believe. And logic isn't most helpful for those anyway. So yeah, here are the goals of this project as I see them right now. So from this course, I would like you to be able to identify arguments. That means recognizing the parts, the premises, conclusion, know what kind of standards of evaluation we're going to be using. So knowing whether or not the argument is deductive or inductive. And also to be able to abstract the form of the argument. It's also important that we learn the language. So the LSAT uses very specific words and they have very specific meanings, and knowing these words will be incredibly helpful. So there are words that are premise indicators, conclusion indicators, necessary and sufficient condition indicators. So knowing what the specific language does is a goal that we have. For the LSAT, it will be incredibly useful to know the common fallacy forms. So there are common informal fallacy forms, there are invalid argument forms, there are valid argument forms, and being able to recognize these will make things go a lot quicker. Another goal is to be able to translate ordinary language statements into proper logical form notation. We're going to try to do this for both propositional logic, so when we use propositions or statements as the unit that we're working with, or categorical logic when we're talking about groups or categories, like all the people here would be a category. translating ordinary language statements. Translating ordinary language statements. So that's taking regular words, so taking the language of the questions, and being able to write them out in such a way that we can see the logical relationships between the parts. It's really a matter of understanding the rules for English and then being able to show why certain things are the case. So translating into logical form will help us be able to do that in a more neat and tidy manner. We also want to learn the truth tables for logical operators and how to use truth tables in basic natural deduction to understand arguments. Truth tables are incredibly helpful for showing us the truth conditions for statements. We can look at complete truth tables where we see all the possible truth values for a proposition, or we can try to use indirect truth tables to see if we can get the information we're interested in. So for instance, if we're wanting to see if two statements are consistent, so if they can both be true, we can use an indirect truth table to assign them the truth value of true and see if we can do so without reaching a contradiction. So they're very useful shorthand tools for understanding logical relations. And then we're gonna know how to create Venn diagrams for categorical arguments. There's not a huge amount of that on the LSAT, but you'll likely have at least one question where using Venn diagrams will be useful. So we're gonna go over that. The resources for reaching goals. So all of this we're going to make available at the GPAS website, greatplainsaction.org. So this tutorial right here that's being recorded will be uploaded. I started a document basically trying to explain what logical information I think will be necessary for success on the LSAT. It's a work in progress, but a lot of the information for this course will be in the document. So reading the document is going to be necessary for understanding what we're doing. And that is finished but not uploaded to the site yet, but it will be up very soon. I created some homework. Obviously, I'm not grading it, so you're not going to get in trouble if you don't do it, but I'm providing examples so that you can work through and see if you're doing stuff correctly. So I created some homework, and I'll provide you with answers and explanations as to why those answers are the case. Another resource is just me. You can always email me with any questions. Each other. So some of you may have taken the LSAT already, and that's awesome. And your advice will be very, very useful and appreciated. So talking with one another and sharing tips or just commiserating can be useful. Oops. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, and so this is, as I mentioned, a work in progress, and we're going to continue to update it and grow this program. As we see the needs that people have, we can better provide information to meet those needs. And so this tutorial right here is getting the ball rolling to see if this is helpful, to see if not, what would be helpful, and to provide encouragement for BIPOC folk looking to go to law school, because we need you people. All right. So some notes. The LSAT uses very precise language. So what I am doing is using actual questions from an old LSAT, from a really old LSAT book, but the questions still work. I want to point out that the LSAT questions, the LSAT in general, is worded in such a way to be incredibly intimidating. So the language is very dense. It looks scary when you see the questions, but just keep in mind that that's intentional. That's a form of gatekeeping. And if you see these questions and you think, what am I doing? I don't belong here. Know that that's not the case, that you do belong, and push past the intimidation. And a part of that, so try not to get hung up on the vocabulary. And also keep in mind that these LSAT questions aren't supposed to presuppose any outside knowledge. So if it's a question about, science or economics, you don't need to know anything about those things to be able to do the questions. So don't stress about that. And I did want to point out that at least, in the older source I was using, some of the questions can be triggering. So your questions, our topic could be, they try to create questions, drawing from, topical debates. So there could be questions about gun violence or homelessness or whatever. Just keep in mind as you're reading through, they're not really looking out for you in the trigger sense. Okay. All right. So, trying to keep track of time. Okay, so I am really bad at typing things up on the computer, and I like to write stuff out. So I have shared with you some photos of notes and stuff that I did on my little whiteboard. All the information here in these photos is in written form in the document itself. Sometimes people understand things in different ways. And so visually and written, I'm going to try to cover as many methods of getting this information across as possible. So the first thing that I want us to get into before we can do much else is understanding logical operators and how to translate statements that use logical operators. All right. So if I write on the whiteboard, can you all see me? Hope so. If not, someone let me know. All right. And it seems like I'm kind of jumping into the middle here because I am. A lot of the preliminary setup explanation is in the document for you to read. And so I'm trying to just here do the stuff that it will help for me to be able to physically be here showing you this stuff. So one of the most useful things that we're going to be able to do after this, I hope, is translate statements into logical form so we can work with them easier. All right. So in propositional logic, the units that we're going to use are propositions. So uppercase letters, and this is a matter of convention. By convention, statement forms and variables are the small letters.
Yes, the boards below the camera.
Thank you. This is hard because my chair is lower than the table.
Maybe you want to disable screen sharing while you're, or just put it higher, like much higher. Yeah, you'll have to have it that high. And then also you're really small right now.
You're really small right now.
Oh, wait, actually, no, I just thought about something. If you guys want to be able to see Jessica and like the logical operators at the same time, you can pull your list of people over to the left, and then it'll make it bigger so that you can see Jessica as well.
Oops. All right. Okay, we'll come back to the logical operators. Talk a little bit about translation before we get there. So yeah, like I said, in propositional logic, the units are propositions. So that's a statement that's either true or false. I forgot about cameras and how mirror images work.
I don't think that does that in Zoom.
That doesn't look right.
I think it shows it properly when you hold things up in Zoom, right, Ronnie?
Yeah, it looks fine to me.
Okay. That's fine. If it looks weird to me, that doesn't matter as long as it's looking good to you. All right, so statements can be simple or compound. So a simple statement would be something like, I like apples. All right, so if we were going to translate that, we would just translate it as capital A, and that represents our proposition. Oops. Dropping stuff. But a lot of statements are compound statements, so they're made up of more than one simple statement. That'd be a sentence like, I like apples and bananas. So there we have two parts, I like apples, and then this is elliptical, but I like bananas. Well, we're gonna add that in there. Make it clear. All right. So these two simple propositions are joined by an and. And so and is an operator. That means it's operating on the components of the statement as a whole, and it determines the truth value. All right. So in logic, we can translate the and as either a dot or an ampersand. I tend to use dots when I'm writing and ampersands when I'm typing. So I apologize if I go back and forth between those two conventions. I try to keep it consistent, but then also I sometimes do what's simplest for me. All right. So if we were going to translate I like apples and I like bananas, we would have A and B. All right. So we can translate and. Okay. We can also say, I like apples or I like bananas. So we're saying one of those is true. And to do that, we use the wedge. So A or B. All right. There are 5 operators that we're going to concern ourselves with. So we have the or is a disjunction. The and that we saw before was conjunction. Okay, this little squish. It says, I do not like apples. Negation is a tilde. And so that operates by changing the truth value of what it's operating on. So I like apples. False that I like apples. Okay. Another important translation we can do is called material implication. And I apologize for my crap handwriting. This is why everything is typed up in a document that you can look at and read. Okay, material implication. That means that there's a relationship where the truth of one part implies the truth of the others. So if I eat apples, I get sick. All right. If I eat apples, and we translate material implication with the horseshoe, I get sick. So if I eat apples, then I get sick. So the truth of me eating the apples brings about the truth of my getting sick. We can also use the horseshoe to translate what are called necessary and sufficient conditions. So a necessary condition, oops, that's the wrong one. Okay, a necessary condition is one that is needed for something to be the case. Sufficient condition is one that is enough to make something the case. So for instance, if I eat apples, I get sick. So just the act of me eating an apple is enough to make me sick. But say we know that I'm sick. Does it follow that we know that I ate an apple? No, something else could be causing me to be sick. So eating an apple isn't necessary for being sick, but it will do the trick. Likewise, if we know that I'm not sick, we know that I didn't eat an apple. So yeah, we'll work on those some more. But yeah, the horseshoe translates if then and necessary and sufficient conditions. All right. And then one more. We don't use this one a lot. Okay. This one's called material equivalence. So that expresses the relationship of something being both a necessary and sufficient condition for something else. So I eat apples if and only if I get sick. All right, so if I'm eating an apple, we know that I'm sick. If I'm sick, I know that I'm eating an apple. IFF is how we shorten if and only if. So if you see if and only if, you know that it's material equivalence. Yeah. All right. So for translating, what we're doing is translating the English language parts into representations of the simple components. And then we represent the relationship between those parts by using one of the logical operators. I'm going to try to get back to my screen showing so I can show you all something real quick. Okay, so those are the logical operators that I just talked to you about. So we use those to translate not. We have the tilde, so that shows us negation. And or but. In logic, and but are logically equivalent. They have the same truth conditions. And those we use either the dot or the ampersand. Or we use the wedge. If-then statements, we use the horseshoe. If and only if, we use the triple bar. It's also called the biconditional. And in your homework, I did make up some statements for you to practice translation. All right. I haven't done this before, but I wanted to show the truth tables for the operators using color. I'm not sure if it'll be helpful, but we'll see. All right, so here we have the full truth table for negation. So the truth tables are going to tell us all of the possible truth values for a given statement. So P can be either true or false. Not P, then, is either false or true. All right, so negation negates the truth value of what it's operating on. And this is included in the document, but I should say part of translation is also involving finding the main operator. So when there's multiple operators, knowing which one governs the most components. And that's going to correlate to, the English language structure and look at, what words are acting over the most part. So if you look at the truth table for the disjunction, P or Q. So we have a full truth table here that shows all the possible truth values for P or Q. We have the truth value when, we have the truth value when they're both true, when one's true, one's false, one's true, or they're both false. All right, so the rule for the disjunction is a disjunction is only false if they're both false, otherwise it's true. If you think about the English language equivalent of this, right, what you're saying is either P is the case or Q is the case. For that to be true, you just need at least one of them to be true. All right, and it's going to be false when P and Q are both not the case. The conjunction. So when we say P and Q, we're saying P is true and Q is true. And that's only true when they're both true. Otherwise, it's false. All right. So what I've circled is are the possible truth values under the operator, given the possible truth values for the components. Material implication, we use a lot of if-then sentences. Sorry if this is hard to read. But for the horseshoe, so if P, then Q, it's only going to be false when P is true and Q is false. Otherwise, it's true. And if you think about what it's saying if P occurs, then necessarily Q is going to be the case. Well, when is that not true? Well, when P is true, but Q is not the case. All right. We can talk about sufficient and necessary conditions too, as the horseshoe represents that. So if we say P is sufficient for Q, that means that having P is enough to guarantee that we have Q. So if we have P, and it's true that having P is enough to guarantee us Q. If we have P and we do have Q, that's true. But if we have P and we don't have Q, that's false. That means that P isn't sufficient for Q. And if we don't have P, it doesn't really matter then, because we're only concerned if this is true, then this has to be true as well. Okay. All right, and then material equivalence, the biconditional, that's used to translate if and only if, or if something says that two things are both necessary and sufficient for. So that's going to be true when they're both true, or true when they're both false. So when they have the same truth value, they're true. Otherwise, they're false. Oh, okay. All right, so that is just a little brief introduction to how to go about translating ordinary language into such a form that we can do it. And knowing the truth conditions, so knowing when a proposition is true is going to be very useful for knowing, for instance, what follows from propositions, or whether or not two propositions are consistent. So I'm gonna try to show an example here. Yeah. So I got two propositions here. If A or B, then C, and B and not C. So if we want to know if these two propositions are consistent, so if we want to know if they can both be true, we could do a whole truth table where we look at all the possible combinations of truth values. And in this case, that full truth table would have 8 lines because there are 3 different variables. All right. So the number of propositional constants squared, because there are two truth values, true or false. All right. So we could do a big long truth table and look at all the possible combinations of truth values. But what we're interested in knowing when we want to know if two statements are consistent is whether or not it's possible for them to both be true, or all be true if there's more than two. So since that's the only line we're interested in, whether or not they can both be true, what we can do is try to see if we can generate that line of the truth table just by skipping right to it. All right. So if A are B, then C. Here the main operator is the horseshoe because it operates over all those parts. So we're going to assume that's true. All right. And then let's assume B and not C is true. All right. So there's like 3 different ways for the conditional to be true. So that's not a good place to start. But we know that the conjunction is only true when both parts are true, right? B and not C is only true when B is true and not C is true, which would make C false. All right. So I'm going to try to put these truth values over here. All right. So C is false. B is true, but if B is true, C is false, then this conditional is false. So these both can't be true. And so using the truth tables this way, we can look at the form of propositions and see whether or not they're consistent. So truth tables are a useful way of figuring out information. All right. I'm gonna go back to sharing real quick. Okay, so the translations and operators that we were working with before, that's for propositional logic. So when the units are propositions. We can also talk about categorical logic, where the units aren't propositions, but rather groups of things. And so when we're doing categorical logic, Venn diagrams are really useful for visually representing the information. So I'm hoping most of you have at least seen 1 or 2 Venn diagrams before, but they're overlapping circles showing the relationship between the 2 categories. And so to graph the information on a Venn diagram, we either use shading or X's. So we use shading when we're talking about entire categories. So all or no, those are called universal statements. All A or B. When we say that, we mean that nothing is A that isn't also B. So when we graph all A or B, we shade in the area of A that's outside of B because nothing's there. If we say no A or B, that means there's nothing that's both an A and a B. So the area of overlap between A and B gets shaded. Nothing's there. With particular claims, some A are B, or some A are not B. we're making a claim about at least one member of the category. So we put an X there to indicate that there is something there. So some A or B, we put an X in the overlap area to show that there is something that is both an A and a B. Likewise, some A are not B. We put an X in the area of A outside of B. So there's something that's an A that is not a B. Okay, and yeah, in the document and homework, I go into a lot more detail about the use of Venn diagrams and stuff. Does anybody have any questions right now? You can unmute and ask. I know this has been kind of fast and confusing and kind of jumped in the middle of some stuff, but yeah, okay. So what I wanted to do for the last little bit is actually I'll show you what we're going to be doing tomorrow. So tomorrow what we're going to do is have a bunch of LSAT questions. We're going to go over them and try to see how we can use these logic techniques to get to the right answer on them. All right. So we'll try one of those today so we kind of get a sense of what we will be doing. And then if you're able to read the document tonight, hopefully things will make more sense tomorrow. And if not, you can just email me lots of questions tonight and I'll try to cover that tomorrow. So I'm going to go back to all right, so here we have an actual LSAT question from my LSAT book. All right. I will read it, but you can read it on your own as well. Okay, so the foreign minister of Zuria announced today that her country was severing diplomatic relations with Nandalo because of Nandalo's flagrant violations of human rights. But Zuria continues to maintain diplomatic relations with many countries that the minister knows to have worse human rights records than Nandalo does. Therefore, despite the foreign minister's claim, this latest diplomatic move cannot be explained exclusively by Zuria's commitment to upholding human rights. All right, so the question asks us, that's the problem. The question asks us, the argumentative structure of which of the following most closely parallels that of the argument in the passage? All right. So now, given that, we can try to get to work and see if we can use some of our logic skills to help with this question. Okay. So this is a question, and the LSAT does tend to utilize very specific kinds of questions, and this kind of question that it's using is a parallel reasoning question. So it requires us to figure out the form of the argument and then see which of the arguments they're presenting us with is an instance of that same form. Yeah, these are difficult questions. Right. But so I'm pretending like we've read the document and are tuned into certain premise and conclusion indicators. So we look at it, and the first thing we want to do is just figure out what the argument is, right? And to do that, usually you start by figuring out the conclusion, because each argument's going to have exactly one conclusion that's being supported by the premises. All right, so we look for a conclusion indicator, and we see the word therefore. All right, therefore is telling us that what follows is what is being concluded. All right, so therefore, despite the foreign minister's claim, the latest diplomatic move cannot be explained exclusively by Zuria's commitment to upholding human rights. All right, that's a lot of words. So part of what we need to do is to abstract the form away from the particular details. And pick this one because it's an interesting, or it's an example of how the content doesn't really matter because we're concerned with the structure of the argument. So like these aren't even real places, right? Zuria and Nindalo. So they're just placeholders for a country. So the specific details don't matter, but what we're looking at is the structure of the argument. All right. One thing to keep in mind, all right, since the question asked us to find the structure that most closely parallels, we want to make sure we have as many of the same components in common between the arguments. So if we look at the question, abstracting is kind of just figuring out what's going on in a basic way without getting into the details. So to do that, we can see who's involved, and it's got some agents, but like whatever characters, we want to know how many are involved in the situation at hand. So if we look at the question, we have, okay, we have Zuria, the country is doing something. To Nandalo. Other countries get mentioned. All right, so the action's kind of going between Zuria, Nandalo, and other countries. All right. And then, so we've got the parts. We want to know what's happening between the parts. So what actions are being taken? So we have Zuria announced that the country was severing diplomatic relations. All right, so we can have as an action severing. All right, that's something that happens. Because of Nandalo's flagrant violations. So they're also providing an explanation. Let's go for R for reasons, or rights violation. Okay. So we see the working parts that we have here. We have one country, another country, there's some other countries, and these are the actions that are being taken. Diplomatic relationships are being severed, and the reasons are being given for them. All right. So with those parts, let's see if we can put together a more bare bones version of this argument. All right. So the foreign minister of Zuria announced today that her country was severing diplomatic relationships with Nandalo because of Nandalo's flagrant violation of human rights. So that's a lot of words, right? So let's see if we can just go Z did S keep the parts in there to N because of reasons. All right. So there's our premise, kind of written in a way that just shows the structure of the claim without going into the details. We have but is and, so we have another premise. Zaria continues to maintain diplomatic relations with many countries that the minister knows to have far worse human rights violations than Nandolo does. All right, so we have an action here. Get Z again. And in this case, they're maintaining, so they're not severing, so did not S to some others. All right, so we got our premises kind of broken down. We got Z did S to N because R, but we also have this claim that Z did not do S to O because despite R. And so what we're concluding is, therefore, so despite the foreign minister's claim, this latest diplomatic move cannot be explained exclusively by Zaria's commitment to upholding human rights. Okay. So Zaria is claiming that they did R, oh, sorry. Zaria is claiming that if, so these reasons, so if there are human rights violations, then they will sever relations. But we're concluding that that isn't the case. The wording is kind of intense, but when we have something like this cannot be explained exclusively, that kind of translates to this is not sufficient. So these reasons are not sufficient for that. All right, so we've got kind of a loose structure of our argument. So we have the form, and now we're going to look at the other questions. We're running a bit out of time. I'll try to finish this one up real quick within the next few minutes. But yeah, so we're going to try to find an argument that has 3 parts. They're doing an action because of reasons. And we have one case where one entity does something to someone else and they give this reason. But we have a case where these other reasons are going down, but that one thing doesn't do that action. And so we got the conclusion. That's very, very abstract, but it kind of helps us keep track of what's going on without having to use a whole ton of words. All right, so if we look at the available option questions, no, put that back up. Okay, well, let's look at the available options and see whether or not they parallel this form. So in A, we say, Henry's parents insist that he eat breakfast before leaving for school because not doing so would be bad for his health. But his parents themselves almost never eat breakfast, so their insistence cannot be completely explained by their concern for his health. All right. One thing that we can look at is that the agents involved are only Henry and his parents. we don't have a situation where we have two agents and another outside agent that is involved in the situation. So we can kind of rule that one out. It doesn't have the right parts. So look at B. Professor Walsh says that only typed term papers will be accepted because most handwriting is difficult to read. But since she lectures from handwritten notes, her policy cannot be exclusively explained by any difficulty she has with handwritten material. This one, as we look at it, it's kind of intuitive to see where the argument goes wrong. So if you read something and you see what the problem is, don't overthink it too much. So we say, professor only accepts typed term papers because handwriting is difficult to read, but they use handwritten notes. So difficulty reading handwritten material can't be the sole explanation. And here we can go, well, obviously there's a difference between reading other people's handwritings and reading your own handwritings. So there seems to be an exploitation of some ambiguity there. So we don't have a similar structure as we do in this example. So we can rule out B. All right. Here we have our C. James claims that he only stole because he was hungry. But although hunger could count for stealing food if food could not be readily obtained in any way, in this case, food was otherwise readily available, and so James' theft cannot be explained by hunger. And it seems, and most of these questions will seem like they're similar. Here we have a case of something isn't the entire explanation. But if we look a little more closely at the structure, we don't have the parallel of the three agents acting. And so we can kind of rule that one out. All right, so let's try D. Armand declined Helen's invitation to dinner on the grounds that socializing with coworkers is imprudent. But since Armand went to a movie with another coworker, Maria, that same evening, his expressed concern for prudence cannot fully explain his refusal. All right, now we know we're off to a good start because we have three agents. We got Armand, Helen, and Maria, the other coworker. We've got an action, so we've got declining dinner. And then we've got a situation where declining dinner for a specific reason, but then we have a situation where that reason still applies, but the socializing wasn't declined. So that very much looks like the structure with that. So we can circle that. And then if we were taking the test, we could probably just move on, but since we're here, we'll talk through E real quick. It is often asserted that fewer teachers, that there are fewer good teachers than there used to be because teachers' salaries have reached a new low, but teachers have always been paid poorly, so low salaries cannot fully explain the perceived decline in the effectiveness of teaching. And again, we don't have the three agents like we do here. So looking at our structure, we've got 3 parts, couple actions, and we conclude that the justification wasn't sufficient to account for the action in this case. And we see that with D, so we would go with D. All right, and so that was a long, hard, complicated question, but we can see that as we're able to abstract the various parts, it becomes a lot more manageable. And so tomorrow, what we're going to do is continue to go through different LSAT questions and see specific instances of how we can use logic to address the questions. I'm sorry for keeping you all a little late. I appreciate everyone showing up. I'm going to get the document and kind of explaining as much of logic as I think you might need without explaining too much. But so if you read the document, probably have a better understanding of what it is that we're doing. I'll get that up. I'll get the homework up and give you guys a chance to practice some stuff, and then I'll put the answers up and go over the answers.
Sorry, I have a quick question. Where is the homework or the document?
They're all going to be on the website. I just have to put them up there.
Oh, okay. So you're going to do that tonight?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. All ready to go. Just need to be uploaded. We all need to be uplifted. But yeah, thanks everyone for showing up for this first little introductory section. Tomorrow we're going to be doing the dirty work of going through a bunch of different actual LSAT questions to see how we can use logic to use them. And then on Thursday, whatever doesn't get finished up, I will go over and address any questions. So feel free to email me with questions and I will look at that. My email is jengelking@greatplainsaction.org.
Do you want to put it in the chat?
Yeah.
I'll put the website in the chat too. The page isn't up yet, but like the page is kind of ready, everybody. It's just that it's not, we haven't made it public. So after you get that up, we can make it public, and you just go to greatplainsaction.org and it'll be under the education tab.
Yep, and that'll be up like within the hour. I can get that up. All right.
This stuff is hard, so thank you.
It is hard, and for this course, I am hoping that the document can do a lot of the heavy lifting. So this, I imagine, is especially confusing because I kind of jumped in the middle to show some stuff. But tomorrow, tomorrow's going to be good, and we will use logic to answer LSAT questions.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for showing up.
Hi, kitata
See you
mahim.
tomorrow. All right, bye.
Bye.